Hey, I'm Kevin, and this is HFX by Bike, a channel all about getting around Halifax by bike. When I make one of these dead zone videos, I'm essentially looking at a part of the city and trying to overlay what I think a functional bike network would look like and outline the challenges to building it. Woodlawn is a low-density suburban area on the Dartmouth side of the harbour, just outside of the circumferential highway. Most of its geographic area is bracketed by Highway 111 in the west, Main Street in the north, Forest Hills Parkway in the east, and Portland Street in the south, although the Portland Hills and Portland Estates neighborhoods to the south are often lumped in with Woodlawn. I've marked on the map the bike network as it currently exists in the area. It pokes into the neighborhood at various places, but doesn't really form any useful connections. Most of the network is made up of multi-use paths, although this varies a lot in terms of their layout. Some are roadside paved paths broadly in line with modern standards, others are of paved nature trails, and some are quick-build low-cost models like this one in Eisner Boulevard. In the southwest, we have the Baker Drive multi-use path, which branches into the Portland Lakes Trail to extend towards Portland Hills and Portland Estates neighborhoods. In the west, there's a pedestrian bridge over Highway 111 that connects to the Penhorn multi-use path. It's only accessible by stairs, so cyclist use is pretty limited. In the northwest of the area, there's another pedestrian crossing point over the highway, but this one has a ramp, and so it's used a bit more heavily. There's a roadside multi-use path along a section of Caldwell in the south, although it doesn't really connect to anything. The Forest Hills Parkway multi-use path brackets the area in the east and is the single largest piece of bike infrastructure in the area. It connects to a network of trails that run off to the east for about 34 kilometers along the coast out to Porter's Lake. There are some narrow multi-use paths along Cranberry Lake, just to the west of the Forest Hills Parkway. To the north, there are some painted bike lanes along a good stretch of Main Street. These aren't used as much due to lack of connectivity and, well, you can probably guess. In trying to map out a network, I'm going to try to connect local points of interest like commercial areas, schools and recreational areas, transit hubs, and importantly, exit and entry points for the neighborhood. To start off, I took a look at the Strava heat map data for cycling activity in the area to see how people are currently making their way through the neighborhood by bike. The two main roads running east-west through the area, Main and Portland, get pretty limited use. Instead, a lot of cycling activity uses lower traffic secondary routes to get around. So instead of Main, people use a chain of Mount Edward, Woodlawn, Spikenard, Valleyfield, and Tacoma to perform the same movement. Similar compromises abound. I don't live in the area, and so for the most part, I'm only here when I'm filming things. So I asked people who do live here what would make their trips by bike easier, essentially what their wish list was. Every person responding flagged Mount Edward Road as being both extremely useful for getting around and cheap and easy to upgrade. The road runs from the northeastern corner of the area and extends towards Portland Street overpass at Highway 111, although it merges into Woodlawn before it gets there. How hard would it be to install, say, an on-road quick-build multi-use path along the northern side of Mount Edward? Not that hard at all, as far as I can tell. Between Langdon Drive in the north and about 50 meters out from where it merges into Woodlawn, Mount Edward is a simple two-lane road that ranges between 10 to 10.8 meters wide. Or to put it another way, it's overbuilt by about 66% relative to its actual function. So adding a quick build multi-use path along this stretch is pretty easy. There aren't any traffic implications to consider because of how overbuilt the road is. Once we get to Woodlawn Road, turn lanes eat up the extra space that we were using, and so to continue the path any further, we have to check to see whether those lanes were load-bearing. I checked the city's traffic volume data, and the short answer is no. The intersection sees between 1,300 and 1,400 vehicles per hour moving during morning and peak hours. To get a sense of how little work the lanes do, let's reimagine the intersection as a single lane roundabout. I've mocked up the turn movement counts from the city's data here. Generally, you want all the approaches to the roundabout to be under 900 per hour, and they all are. It's an overbuilt intersection that probably on balance delays traffic relative to a simpler design like this kind of roundabout. I'm not advocating for making Mount Edward and Woodlawn a roundabout, just pointing out that the turn lanes don't actually seem to be load-bearing, so having a multi-use path move straight through the intersection and continue on to the next section wouldn't cause any traffic problems. Things do actually get a little bit more complicated on approach to Woodlawn Plaza, where the lanes do actually get used to make best use of the signal time at Portland Street, so I'll have the path terminate near Day Avenue for now. A little bit less common of an ask from the people I queried, but it makes sense if you look at the point of interest map, is to extend the path north from the intersection at Mount Edward and Woodlawn. This has a lot of the same properties as the path I just mocked up. It's a two-lane road that's roughly 4 lanes wide, so just by adding a quick build multi-use path on the eastern side is pretty cheap and painless. It's a little harder on approach to the intersection with Main, where once again the turn lanes come into play. At that point it's probably easier to migrate the path onto the sidewalk to make the interface with the intersection a bit easier. This is a little bit more expensive, but it's over a small area. This path would connect together a junior high school, a high school, a community center, several sports fields, and a community college, and flows seamlessly off of the path we just established on Mount Edward. The highways that run at the periphery of the city's urban core often act as barriers when you're outside of a car, with crossing points being limited to a handful of locations. Adding more crossing points across Highway 111 was one of the most common requests I received. There's an existing pedestrian bridge midway between Portland and Maine. It doesn't get used very often for cycling because, well, stairs. We could reconfigure or replace it with one that uses ramps, making for a connection between the network we're building on the eastern side of the highway with the more developed one that already exists on the west. On the east side, a sidewalk extends down from the bridge towards Arthorpe Drive. Going north, there's what I can only describe as a goat path that leads towards the commercial area. We can make this a little bit better just by having a standard multi-use path run north-south between the commercial area and Arthorpe, which would give somewhere for people crossing the bridge to land and makes it easier for people to move around their own neighborhood. We've got a pretty good east-west corridor and a crossing point over the highway with a good north-south corridor, so now we just need to connect them together. I think the easiest solution is to use the low-traffic streets near the pedestrian crossings to connect to Spikenard, which then runs to the network I mocked up on Woodlawn. Spikenard sees about 2,500 to 3,000 vehicles per day on it, which makes it a little busy for comfortable open traffic riding for most people, so I'm going to add another quick build multi-use path to the stretch. Like all of the other roads I've given this treatment to, Spikenard is overbuilt by about 40%, so there's no spacing issues to manage here. The pathing isn't ideal, but I'm doing my best with the wonky street network I've got here. Okay, we've got an east-west corridor, a north-south corridor, and a connection coming up from Baker Drive, all converging on Woodlawn Plaza. How hard would it be to connect all of these parts of the network together? Extremely hard. Just by looking at the city's traffic data, there isn't actually that many cars moving through this stretch of road, but it's laid out to more or less maximize congestion, and it does so basically using all of the available space. So extending a multi-use path network through it is going to be pretty painful, though not technically impossible. Fortunately, we don't have to pick that fight. Woodlawn Plaza is being redeveloped and the adjoining road systems reconfigured in the next 15 to 20 years. Preliminary design suggests that there will be space to connect to the path on Baker Drive more or less just by going in a straight line. So in the near term, there probably won't be a connection here, but in the long run, it seems pretty likely. Portland Street remains a bit of a barrier without a connection to Baker. In the spirit of a network build-out geared towards speed and low cost, let's explore an alternative crossing point, Carver Street a few blocks to the west. Carver is a local street running north-south a few blocks over from Woodlawn, and with a signalized crossing at Eisner. The intersection with Portland is an exit only for motor vehicle traffic, something that's been in place for about 20 years as far as I can tell. Looking south, we have the actually existing quick build multi-use path on Eisner. This wouldn't be very hard to connect. Eisner is already overbuilt like all the other major roads I've covered so far, so just extending that multi-use path north and then crossing where it's convenient would be pretty straightforward. There's almost enough space at the intersection to make this model work, but not quite. So just like with the intersection with Maine, the path is going to have to go at least partially off-road at Portland and then use the existing crossing path to cross. The traffic barrier at the entrance of Carver could be updated to work like the one on George Dauphiny and West End Halifax. After that, bikes could move in mixed traffic to connect to the east-west path that we established before. Carver has a little bit more traffic than I'd like for this kind of thing, but it's already been traffic calmed, and besides, this is a stopgap crossing until something better comes along, so good enough. We still haven't connected to the area's transit terminal, which isn't ideal. If we're approaching from the west, then Portland Hills is the easiest path. It's extra wide like the other roads we've looked at, so that's fine for a quick build. Some low traffic streets run over to Caldwell too, which is a bonus connection. A few people asked if the orphaned path on Caldwell could be expanded. Sure, but not as a low-cost quick build. Caldwell is too narrow to support that, so it's going to have to be an off-road multi-use path, kind of like the one that already exists. This changes once you get north of Portland and connect to Dorothy and Spring. The streets get wide enough so that you can revert to our trusty quick build design for that entire loop. And of course, the new loop is a stone's throw away from the original east-west corridor on Mount Edward, so here are a few connections for that. The transit terminal is now connected in all directions, although some of the pathing is less than ideal. I'm doing my best with the street network the 1970s gave me. Okay, we've got a pretty functional network made up mostly of quick build multi-use paths, but with a few higher cost permanent features added at intersections and where there are space constraints that are pressing. I've mostly avoided the major east-west roads that exit the area until now because by default all of the space is taken and it's not worth a fight if I can achieve the same goals in other ways. An exception to this is Portland Street. The timeline is vague, but sometime in the next decade, Portland Street is going to be functionally redone, and this remodel is currently slated to include both transit and bike lanes, including a new crossing point over the Highway 111 overpass. This somewhat changes the dynamics of the quick build network I already laid out, since the ability to use Portland to move east-west and cross the highway simplifies a lot of movements. Most of the network as outlined is still fine, but some of the stuff on the western edge of the highway, and particularly upgrading the crossing, becomes a little less necessary if there's going to be a direct path along Portland. There are a few paths of travel I neglected in building out my hypothetical network. Main Street is the obvious one. It already has painted bike lanes on it, so why not use that space to build something a little bit better? The reason I left it out is because I think Mount Edward provides a much easier east-west corridor than Main Street. Main functions to feed cars onto Highway 111, which bikes can't access legally, thereby limiting its usefulness. Probably the best design would be a two-way bike lane or multi-use path on the southern side of Main. This would roughly align with the existing pedestrian crossing in the northwest of the area. The drawback is that this does require some road work on Main, but then we get basically the same thing, faster and cheaper on Mount Edward, so why not just do that instead? In a related point, I didn't create a corridor along Tacoma and Valleyfield. This is currently the main path that cyclists take in lieu of Main Street to reach the pedestrian bridge in the northwest. The reason I didn't put anything there is that I thought it would be redundant with the connections in the area that I had already added. This isn't to say that it can't be done, there's absolutely space to do it, but I prioritized other paths that, once done, make Tacoma Valleyfield a little bit less relevant, so I didn't bother putting it in. How hard would all of this be? It's a mixed bag from section to section. Probably the largest cluster of improvements for the lowest cost would be creating the east-west Mount Edward spine, the north-south Woodlawn corridor, and crossing at Carver and Eisner, and maybe a corridor along Spikenard. By volume, most of that grid could be done as quick build multi-use paths at pretty low cost, with a few places on approaches to intersections actually requiring construction work. It leaves a lot of misconnections in the area, but it would probably generate the largest quality of life improvements for the least amount of spending. The rest of the pitched network isn't contingent on the Portland Street redesign or Woodlawn Plaza redevelopment, but they definitely help it along. The street network is basically spaghetti, and having Portland serve as a spine is extremely useful for the rest of the network to be built out. Those are some ways I've thought to build out a basic bike network in Woodlawn. Thanks for watching through to the end of the video. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos all about getting around Halifax by bike and urbanism more generally. And let me know in the comments how you would want to move bikes through the Woodlawn neighborhood. That's it for this one. As always, thanks for watching, and see you next time.